online learning to maintain the continuous acquisition of all learner, especially in writing class. And so you can see on the slide here, and writing as the most complicated skill, and as the Richards and year 2002 just mentioned about the linguistic compete and intercultural and discourse compete. So that's the reason why the demand of the various writing skill. The next one, I would like to talk about the research how the limited time for teacher assessment is about the peer assessment here and exchange understanding of the social linguistic knowledge. Just about the JHIN 2012, just mentioned about it. And the next one, it is about the research question. That what are the teacher perspective towards the feasibility of asynchronous peer assessment in COVID-19? So the next one, Mr. G will talk about the next section. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Huy, for your introduction to my part. And for the next part of our study, we introduce to you the three literature reviews of our part for the very basic concepts of peer assessment. As you may know, peer assessment is considered an alternative formative assessment in which the learner can participate in giving feedback and assess the standards of academic paper written by other learners at the same level and the same academic context because they study in the same course, and it's also known as the opportunity for other learners to take active roles in the exchange of useful feedback in the learning process, where they can give some feedback for the performance of their friends and the peer in the class for the strengths and weaknesses, and they can make some propositions for the friend to improve the academic paper. And it may require the learner to base on particular holistic or analytical rating scale to give comment for their friends about the performance expressed and the product. And when we talk about peer assessment, we base on the learner reflection to introduce their perspective toward performance of their friends rather than the total dependence on the teacher assessment. And when we consider the peer assessment, it may refer to the concepts of collaboration among the learners in the performance. And when we introduce the term peer assessment, it can be interchangeable with similar terms such as peer evaluation or peer review or critique throughout the process of communication outside and inside the class. And for this study, we focus on exploring the teacher perspective toward whether we can apply the peer assessment in the asynchronous manner in the COVID time when we cannot communicate with the learners on face-to-face basis, and we had to conduct on the learning and teaching in the very online classes. And this accelerates the sense of collaboration among the learners to negotiate the performance of each other to propose the most appropriate decision toward the target version of the product. And then when we introduce the peer assessment into the class, the quantities of exposure to the language can be strengthened and enhanced in order to maximize the effectiveness of second language acquisition. And actually, this idea is correlated with Vygotsky-Jones-Rosimo development when the learner can obtain higher performance in the assistance of their peer. And their peers can provide the feedback and they will be more aware of their limitation. But we had to acknowledge the limitation in our context of teaching, because sometimes we had to take very large class size and we don't have enough time to provide the feedback on an individual basis for all the learner. Therefore, we had to introduce the peer assessment into the class to enhance the degrees of exposure and enhance the degrees of learning among the learner after the class instead of the very limited amount of time in our classroom. And in the next part, I will introduce to you some significant roles of online peer assessment in the academic writing. And actually, we had to confront the COVID-19 pandemic for about nearly 3 years, from 2019 to 2020 and now. And therefore, the need for online teaching and learning is really demanding. And the applications of peer assessment in online academic writing has so certain values in the second language teaching. The main reason is because the peer assessment is very beneficial for the learner to assess the learning output, and based on the negotiations of other work, is it possible for the learner to reduce overestimation or they think over the performance, and maybe sometimes they underestimate the qualities of their personal work from self-assessment. And the involvement in assessing the strengths and weaknesses of other learners may contribute to the higher levels of reflection among the learners. They can think about their strengths, they can think about their weaknesses, and they can improve the learning strategy to foster the effectiveness of their learning process. And when the learner read and evaluate the products of other peers or the partner, they will be able to gain more insight in the interaction with the writing rubric and to achieve certain level. But sometimes when some of my learners, honestly, when they talk about learning English, they focus much on like learning vocabulary instead of understanding the grading rubric. And that's in this manner, the peer assessment can help the learner to realize and understand, to get more insight into the holistic scale of the rubric. And moreover, the learner will realize the mistake of the peer to avoid for further learning activity. Sometimes they don't make those mistakes, and then when they figure out the mistake from their friend, they can avoid them in the future. And this model is really helpful to address the partial wrong assumption among the learners. Moreover, when we talk about peer assessment, it can reduce the degrees of dependence on teacher. I think really strong points about peer assessment in our class. Because in our class, we had to teach about 50 learners, and really tremendous. And it's quite impossible for me as a teacher at university to give feedback on an individual basis for all the learner. And when we introduce peer assessment, we can reduce this one and can enhance the confidence among the learner because they can monitor their personal learning process. And moreover, they can understand and they can learn some ideas from their friends in academic writing, because some of my learners, they lack the ideas when they will post some paper, and when they read the papers of other members, and they can understand, they can learn the ideas, learn the background knowledge from other members. I think this is a really strong point of peer assessment. However, the peer assessment in the online basis had to confront certain limitation, like the learner, they don't have enough, like the assessment ability or the competence. They don't know how to give feedback for their friends, and they don't have the profound understandings of the subject matter. And sometimes they don't dare to give feedback or the honest feedback for their friends because they want to violate or they want to threaten the face of their member. Therefore, this is a really big challenge when we introduce the peer assessment in online classes. Based on the previous ideas about the methods of online peer assessment, we conduct this study based on 15 university lecturers. Sorry, I made the typo for this one. We conduct this study on 15 university lecturers and the University of Education who are teaching English major, and we introduce mixed method design, and we collect the data based on the questionnaire, and this questionnaire adapted by Quencher 2018 and the deep and in-depth interview from 3 participants. And based on the findings of the study, we can see that for this one, we can see the highest means score relating to the item number 14, that the learners can avoid the mistake that they may cause from the friend's paper. And this actually in relation with the reverse study, where the learner, they can read their friend's paper, they can learn the idea, learn from the mistake, and they can avoid in the future. However, what's really different from our previous assumption is about the methods number 4, the student not willing to do peer assessment. And I think actually when we begin with this one, we start this one, and I don't think the peer assessment can receive this low mean score because those teachers, they believe that the peer assessment is really challenging and we need to spend a lot of time on guiding, introducing the rubric for the learner to understand the rubric, and they can perform the peer assessment after the class, because sometimes they're lazy, because sometimes they don't have enough time, and sometimes they don't know how to give the feedback because they're not aware whether the performance of their friends is bright or brown. And this really big matter when we talk about the peer assessment. It's caused a lot of challenges for those teachers at university. However, those university lecturers, they propose some strengths and they receive based on the observation from the class after they introduce the peer assessment into the class. The first one is about the improvements of personal writing. They can learn from their friend and they can perform their personal writing style throughout the article, and they can have the freedoms of the writing skill. And when they can learn from their friends, they will realize, okay, this one can be accepted and that one is not, rather than they have to depend totally on the teacher. And actually, when we are the teacher, we cannot give all the learners everything, and they have to learn from their friends for peer learning or for the collective learning in writing. Another point I need to mention is about from the perspectives, those teachers from the interview, they mentioned the learning spirits and responsibility was enhanced when they introduced the peer assessment into the class, because it can reduce the inferiority and increase the learning spirits among the friends. When they learn from their friend, when they receive the feedback from their friends on their strengths and weaknesses, and they had to change and they had to adapt the learning strategy to improve their performance in the future. When they receive a lot of feedback from their friends, and it can foster their lifelong learning ability and responsibility in the future. However, when we introduce the peer assessment in the COVID time on an online learning basis, they had to deal with certain challenges. The first one is about we need to have a careful training and scaffolding for the learners. It's a big challenge because we understand the meaning of peer assessment. However, the learner they hesitate or they're not willing to perform the peer assessment in the class, and some of the learners refuse to do the peer assessment, and they have a lot of excuses for not to do the peer assessment. Another point is about the subjectivity, because they're not from they had no pedagogical training. They're just a learner, and they just give the comments based on their personal ideas, based on their personal assumption. Therefore, the feedback and the comments can be really subjective. And another point is about the matters, the challenges to observe or provide the individual guidance. Because we introduce the peer assessment, actually, we introduce the rubric in front of the class, but after that, we cannot ensure whether all the learner can perform the peer assessment or not. This is a big matter. And those lecturers, they share that when some of the learners, they have some mistake when giving feedback, they have to revise, scaffold again and again, as this can be really time consuming. Another point for the online matter is about the technical problems. And sometimes they don't know how to give feedback online. They don't know how to put the feedback and how to edit the version and the learning management system. And all the technical problems also become the skills for the learner for not to do the peer assessment. And based on the findings of our study, I propose some implication for the use of peer assessment from the perspectives of the university lecturers. The first one is about we need to prepare the learner before they do the peer assessment, which means we need to give the careful guidance, and you need to ensure that the learner, they have enough ability to do the peer assessment. However, we need to be really realistic. When we talk about peer assessment, we don't put on the responsibilities of ensuring the quality of the paper on the shoulders of the learner. We just try to introduce the peer assessment to enhance the reflection among the learners, not to give them the duty to do the assessment. We also had to scaffold, we had to check and provide immediate feedback for the learners for all the writing pieces, because sometimes the learner, when they give their feedback, the feedback can be wrong, can be right. And when they give the wrong feedback, we can check whether what they understand actually correct or not. And sometimes they misunderstand the piece or the knowledge or the performance in the writing. The first one is about the objectivity should be enhanced. Some of the learners, they don't dare to give feedback for their friends, and therefore they avoid giving feedback for the performance of their friends. And to avoid the subjectivities of the personal comments, we can introduce the blind assessment, which means we will remove the names of their friends and just give them a random paper and then give feedback for that paper. It can be more objective for this one. Another point is about the sense of collaborative learning should be enhanced. Sorry, I made the mistake for this one, the enhanced with AD. Okay, the sense of collaborative learning is about when they receive negative feedback, they need to acknowledge, they need to respect the feedback, and we should then be demotivated by the negative feedback because our performance, you learn in the learning process, your performance can be right, can be wrong, it's okay for that one. And therefore, we need to enhance this spirit among the learner. And we should foster the learner integrity. The fostering of learner integrity is about we need to give them the sense or the spirit they have to give the honest feedback, not for the blank comments or the blank phrases for their performance. And they need to try to make effort to read the papers of their friends and give the feedback based on their personal understanding. Not give some reason of it, okay, this is good, this is not good. It's not for the integrity. And when we conduct this study, we had to deal with certain limitations. The first one about this study really for the small scale in one department or university, and it cannot ignore or compare the perspective of different university lecturers from different cultural backgrounds or different learning contexts. And we lack the classroom observation because I just interviewed and received the questionnaire from the university lecturer. I cannot attend the class to understand clearly on how they introduce the peer assessment into the class. That's a big limitations of my study. And actually, after we conduct this study, we can see that the peer assessment actually really promising in the academic writing context to enhance the learner's competence with positive attitude, where they can learn, they can reflect their performance. And it's actually possible in the context of COVID-19. However, we had to deal with several big challenges in our classes, and then we need more study to minimize the difficulty, like the matters of subjectivity or the matters of learner laziness, or they don't desire to perform the peer assessment. Therefore, we need more study to address those issues. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time, your listening. And if you have any question for me, and you can raise your voice or you can type into the box.
Yes, thank you very much, Tri Nguyen and Huy Nguyen. Both of your names similar. That's nice. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting session. And I hope all our audience would have gathered many points from your presentation, because peer assessment is a common practice, and surely educators needs guidelines. One of the important thing that what I personally learned from your presentation is, I think it's very important, train the how to assess, conduct the peer assessment. I think that's a very important part, so that the validity of the score that what the peers carry out is kind of valid. Okay, and yes, now let's open this for discussion. Any questions, clarifications, or anything from the audience?
Hello. I just thanks for your presentation. I really enjoyed it, and just want to share a little bit of context because we also use peer assessment a lot. But also I have a question to follow. So in our experience, we do use peer assessment regularly every week, and we found that what works for us is that first we do deliver learner training so that students know how to do it. We train them to use the rubric, and we make it happen on a regular basis so that we can have follow-up and check-up and provide feedback if anything goes wrong, or if students don't really know or just do it without any sense of seriousness, for example, and we also make it part of our assessment. The 5% of the whole course is not much, but it's really help. However, there's one question here from our experience that do you really think is help teachers save sometime when marking? I'm really curious about that one, because even though students do the peer assessment, I think what we recognize is that to make it work, we do have a lot of work to do. So I'm just really curious about whether peer assessment can help teachers reduce the amount of time of work and assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miss Zhang, right? Do you call
Yes.
name correctly? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I got your questions about the matter. We had to spend a lot of time on providing the learners with the guidance, and we had to revise the feedback. So what I mean in the peer assessment is not about the methods of assessment. I try to foster the performance for writing. And when it's not about, okay, I agree with you that we need to spend the time for giving them guidance. It will cost us more time, but in the very class side, so when they can learn the vocabulary, they can learn the ideas from their friends, and at the end of the courses, they can improve the general performance in writing. I don't mean that we introduce the peer assessment to reduce the time of the teacher for assessment. I mean for the general performance in writing.
Okay, thanks, Tri, very much for your answer. And that's give me another question. I'm not sure if you have any other people have questions first. I can ask it later.
Yeah, sure. You can ask me the question. You can contact me by email.
Okay.
To share with you, to learn from you.
Now I see some people are typing there, so maybe I just ask my question quickly. I'm just thinking about, wondering about, we have talked about the practicality of peer assessment. So how about its reliability and, validity of the test of peer assessment?
Yeah, I do have noted down the same question what Tran has raised. The validity, because the peers, how do we acknowledge, because as a assessment, we need that authority of knowledge, which is lacking at the peer assessment. So how do we ensure the validity of the score, of the assessment score?
Thank you for your questions about the validities of the peer assessment. But when I do about the peer assessment, I don't put on the responsibilities of assessment on the learner. So the matters I focus on the peer assessment is about their reflection, rather than whether they can do the assessment, because they are the learners and not the teacher. They have to do the assessment. We have to do the assessment as the teacher. So what I mean for this one is about I introduce peer assessment to enhance their reflection, and they will realize their strengths and weaknesses based on the feedback from their friends. And when they give the feedback for their friends, the feedback can be right, can be wrong. When the feedback is wrong, we are the teacher, and we take the role to consolidating and revising the comment, the wrong assumption. So that's what I mean for the peer assessment. Because when they give the wrong feedback, which means what they understand is not correct, and we have to scaffold and consolidate that one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tri.
Yeah, here we have another question from Li Luang. I contact. Would you like to read that, or Tri, can you straight away read that?
Yeah, okay. I received a question from Ms. Lee.
Yes.
It mentions about when she conduct the peer assessment for one of the assignment for the master student, and it does impact the final grade. Even though the percentage is small, the issue is the whole class conspire to give each other maximum Yeah. Do you face this issue? Yeah, I agree with you. I also had to deal with this issue because when they give their friends the mark, sometimes they give a lot of feedback, maybe the negative feedback for a lot of mistake. But when they try to give the maximum score for their friends, I also deal with this one. And personally, I don't introduce the score for the learners in peer feedback because I don't put that one into the matters of the final grade. I just put this one about the participation score. When they do the peer feedback, they will receive the score for participation. Because sometimes they maybe when they read the paper and that paper is perfect, that paper is very good, and it's impossible for them to give any comments. Or the paper is higher than their level and it's impossible for them to give any comments. Therefore, I don't put the final grades or the final score for peer assessment. I just give them some like the score for encouraging them to participate in this activity only. And it will not like cause harm to their final grade. I suggest assessing peer feedback is an additional important task for better. Yeah, I agree with you. That's for what I mean. Because actually I still wonders about for if the learner they make the mistake in the writing, it's actually easy for us to figure out the mistake and give them feedback for that mistake. But I always wonders about the mistake that are not shown in the paper. I mean, the potential mistake in the crew test. That's the really big matter. I still wonder. Therefore, when they give the peer assessment and they propose a wrong assumption or the wrong suggestion, I can consolidate that one. Or I try to consolidate the misunderstanding among the learners. That's what I mean.
Yeah, so we have a lot of discussion. Yes, here is also Tran is giving some additional points to improve our feedback practices. Yes, very interesting session. And I hope all of us have taken some important learning points from this session. And we wish you all the best to carry out a wonderful peer assessment in your next semester. Thank you very much, everyone. And see you all in the closing ceremony. Join us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Bye.